Hey all, Danielle here. A couple of quick announcements before we get into the podcast this week. First, starting pretty soon on March 18th, we are hosting a free Get Yourself Together boot camp. This is a free 5-day completely virtual boot camp that I have put together to help us with our executive function support. We are going to help you get crystal clear on your priorities, handle procrastination, inertia, fear of getting things done, and create systems and routines that work for you, not other people. So if you're interested, please go ahead to neurodiverging.com/together and sign up. It's completely free. It starts March 18th, and we do have some exciting bonuses and prizes for folks who participate. Second, I want to let you know that we are now in our early bird purchase period for collaborative families. If you're not familiar with it, collaborative families is a bigger, badder version of our old 6-week program. It is now a 3-month program. It is an evidence-based, neurodiversity affirming, welcoming neurodivergent parenting class for parents of kiddos from day one all the way up to young adult. Our goal is to improve your family's relationships, communication, and trust in 3 months with a neuroscience-based curriculum. The program starts on May 1st and runs through the end of July. If you enroll before the end of March, you get $100 off as your early bird bonus. So if you're interested, please go ahead and go to neurodiverging.com/parenting. So again, those links, if you're in the car or whatever, are neurodiverging.com/parenting or neurodiverging.com/together. If you have questions, as always, please get in touch at contact@neurodiverging.com. I hope to see some of you very soon.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Neurodiverging podcast. My name is Danielle Sullivan, and I am your host. Thanks for tuning back in. I'm glad that you're here today. Today is part one of what's going to be a multi-part series where I am talking about burnout. And we have discussed burnout on this podcast multiple times from multiple different angles. But I personally have not actually experienced burnout in several years. As a late identified person, I didn't know what autistic burnout was until I was identified and was already in pretty chronic burnout. Looking back, I think most of my 20s was in chronic burnout. But once I was identified and I was able to do some of the work to sort of reframe and re-understand what I needed as a human being and as an autistic brain specifically, I was able to make some significant changes that really reduced a lot of my day-to-day challenges. And so now I have been burnout free for quite a number of years. But around last summer, 2023, I almost hit full burnout again. And since this was the first time that this had happened to me in many years, it took me a while to realize that that was going on. And then I was able to sort of catch it before it really dipped. And now, about 6 months later, I would say that I'm basically recovered, which is kind of unheard of. Because at least with my clients and in my experience, really solving burnout usually takes a lot longer than that. But since I had this experience, I thought, well, maybe it would be useful to some of y'all to hear me talk about a very recent experience of burnout, what caused it, what led up to it, and then what I'm doing now that I'm out of the sort of passive healing stage and into the active addressing stuff stage again, and sort of like doing the work to fix all the stuff that fell over while I was in burnout is kind of where I am now, right? Because a lot of stuff falls over when you're in burnout because you can't handle as much. And so that's what, for part one today, I would like to talk about kind of what led up to that burnout experience and how I noticed it was what was happening and was able to sort of intervene a little earlier than I would have been able to, 10 years ago. So before I dive in, I just do want to, of course, thank my patrons. They are the best people. Patrons throw a couple of bucks in the pot every month over at patreon.com/neurodiverging to support this podcast and allow it to keep going. They pay for our low-income clients to receive coaching access. They also support like my ability to do this. So they're a fantastic group of people. And I am so honored that they are spending their hard-earned dollars on this podcast for us to have available to the public. So thank you, thank you, thank you to all of our patrons for making that possible. If you're interested in becoming a patron, you will love the community. We have a private Discord community. where we meet twice a week for accountability and body doubling sessions. We meet once a month socially. People chat on there all the time. We talk about the podcast episodes. We talk about recent news and neurodivergence, and we talk about our own lives and what's going on and support each other. And it's a really amazing place to be. And so if that sounds like something that you're into, please go over and join us. And there's lots of other like perks and things you can actually like get in terms of classes and discounts and stuff like that too. So patreon.com/neurodiverging. All right. So let's dive into this. Around June last year, just to sort of set the stage. So June 2023, things were going well in my general life, my kind of all the spheres of my life were moving relatively well. The kids were doing okay. My mental health was fine. My partners were doing okay. We were making some really great progress on some house projects that I've put a lot of time and energy into. Neurodiverging as a company, as a kind of head of the company, obviously I put a lot of energy into neurodiverging coaching, and it was going well. We had a huge influx of new clientele about 8 months prior, and I had kind of had to very quickly do a lot of work to grow. And it had caused some, not anything close to burnout. It caused me some stress. How's that? Of like positive stress of like, oh gosh, we're growing really fast. This is amazing, and wasn't what I really expected. Let's hire some folks. Let's create, the underlying stuff you need to have in a business, like payroll and calendars and training manuals and all these things, right? And so around June, it had sort of started to quiet down. But then what happened is I had an unexpected pregnancy in June. And I'm not going to talk about this too much. So this is like 2 minutes of discussion, just for those of you who are concerned. I have wanted another child for a long time. For various reasons, it is not likely to happen and was not likely to happen. And so the pregnancy came as a huge surprise, but something I was really excited about. And I should just say that it was actually early July that I recognized that I was pregnant. I was incredibly excited and happy about it. And then in August, found out that the pregnancy was not viable. And so that's all I'm going to say about it. So I'm not going to like get into details but basically had a miscarriage. It was very uncomfortable physically and also just mentally very draining. There's so many things that can go into causing autistic burnout for clients and for me in my personal experience. For me in the past, it was a lot of kind of emotional turmoil, not really understanding my alexithymia, not understanding kind of communication styles, having a lot of empathy, but not really like knowing how to use it appropriately. What was really interesting about this particular burnout last summer was that it was really clear to me. Well, now it is. Okay. In the moment, I should just say it was a burnout. I had no energy. Everything sucked. I was exhausted. I was non-functional. The house fell to ruins. Everybody was eating takeout. It was just like one of those things, right? What I find really interesting now thinking about it though, is here's what caused my burnout. Okay. So there were all these practical level things, right? I had a miscarriage. I felt like crap, physically, right? I also had, stuff going on with the business and stuff going on with kids that popped up, in September a little later. And so there was stuff practically happening that like this one thing triggered it or started it, and then stuff piled on top of it, right? But really, what it came down to for me, what caused the burnout for me, sort of mentally as opposed to physically, was I had put so much energy into envisioning a new life, right? So one thing about pregnancy, if you have never had a child, or if you've gone through any other life experience, though, maybe you expected to get married, you expected to enroll in a certain college, you expected to be able to go on in some amazing vacation, right? And then for whatever reason, the thing doesn't go, right? The thing doesn't work out. And what happened in my case was I spent weeks and weeks and weeks of intense energy envisioning a future in which XYZ happened. all the planning you do when you think you're going to have a baby. All of that I had done was not going to happen. So then I used all this energy, like trying to set up for something that wasn't going to occur. And then on top of that energy loss, there was also, okay, now I have to replan the whole future again, right? So I spent all this energy planning and envisioning and working and figuring out a set of problems I thought existed. Then that stopped, that didn't work, but I had a new set of problems that existed. And so I spent even more energy and time and effort re-envisioning and planning and practicing for what I expected the future to be. So the first set of energy, right, was like expected in my day-to-day. Like I expect to be envisioning for the future in my day-to-day. But then when the baby didn't happen, I had to like find and utilize sort of backup energy that I don't really have on top of the physical manifestations of dealing with like huge hormonal shifts and physical miscarriage, right? So I had physical challenges on top of emotional challenges, on top of mindset challenges, right? And to have to expend yet more energy from a place of kind of emergency response really, really, really pushed me back, right? So then I didn't have enough energy left to recoup from all this crap, right? I used energy to plan. It didn't work. I had to use emergency energy to reshuffle everything again. And then any little thing that happened, right? A kiddo having a problem. One of my kids had a big cavity and we had to go to like 6 dental appointments about it. I would have been able to handle that in most cases, but because I had used up my emergency energy storage, I didn't have anything to use to deal with this dental issue, right? And he's fine. We solved it. So like, don't worry about him. But like, it was just an example, right? The garden fell apart. I was not able to really meal plan and cook. And so I was eating, if I was eating takeout, which is fine, like morally neutral, right? But I often was not feeding myself or remembering to eat or drink or remembering to go to bed on time, or I was not able to sleep because of the hormones and the anxiety and all this, right? And so then I was even lower resourced. So now that I am like out of burnout, what enabled me to get there, right? And I'm going to talk about this more practically in future episodes, but the thing that I really remember from when I was originally identified as autistic and started to realize I was in burnout and was trying to implement ideas to get out of it, and then what I've learned from clients since then, and then what enabled me to kind of try to approach this burnout is, first, it took me like 2 months to recognize that I was in burnout because it didn't happen overnight. It's not like I woke up one day and I was in burnout. And initially, because of the fact that the miscarriage had prompted this burnout, for lack of better framing, I thought that I was bereaved, right? I thought that I was experiencing, and I was, right? But in addition to, I thought that I was experiencing a sort of very difficult but normal level of grief, right, around the loss of the baby, but also the loss of the things I had planned, right? And I think it's pretty normal when you've had any kind of loss, that you're going to feel pretty awful for a while. And there's ways that awfulness checks the same boxes as the awfulness of burnout, right? That there's some crossover in it. And so at first I thought, okay, well, you're grieving and it's going to take a while and you just have to kind of let yourself do it. And then you'll feel better, like not right away, but like you will. And as my physical health returned, I noticed, and this was maybe in about October, I noticed that I wasn't feeling as okay as I expected to. So I knew that I wasn't going to get over this issue like quickly, right? So I wasn't expecting like grief would be 3 months and then I'd be done. Like that's not realistic, right? But I did expect, oh, there will be an initial space where these feelings are intense and ongoing. And then they will start to sort of space out a little bit because that's been my previous experience of loss and grief, right? And what I noticed was that at the time when I was physically better and should have been starting to be emotionally better, I was still very easily emotionally triggered. I was still not sleeping well. I was still having trouble eating. I was still having trouble like doing basic self-care, right? And that's when I started to be like, oh, this isn't just grief. This is burnout, right? This is your kind of brain, my kind of autistic brain, because of the huge emotions that grief calls for. My brain is using so much energy processing this set of emotional experiences that there is nothing left for the day-to-day tasks and the basic living skills, right? They're just gone, right? And of course, I was prioritizing parenting, right? Because I have two kind of vulnerable kids, vulnerable in terms of their ages, but also in terms of their neurodivergences. And so anything that I had that was not going to like processing grief was going to parenting, right? Um, like communicating and hanging out with and enjoying my kids, right? Which I don't think was a bad decision, but it did mean that there was no energy for anything else, Once I was able to realize that, hey, this is not just grief, this is now grief plus burnout, then I was able to be like, okay, I know what to do with burnout, at least practically. And it's been a while since I had to practice knowing what to do in burnout, but I do know what to do in burnout. Here's what burnout does. Burnout is exhausting. Burnout makes basic daily living skills impossible. It messes with your executive function. So you literally can't think from step to step to step. One of the other reasons that I realized I was in burnout is because I spend most of my time in my room. I work in my room, I sleep in my room, I hang out in my room, I read in my room. It's my like cozy safe space, right? Anytime I left my room for this like 3-month period, I would walk out there and I'd go, why did I come out here? I just could not hold information through the door, right? That piece of executive function that lets you carry your working memory, right? That lets you carry information from one environment to a new environment, right? And a lot of people have trouble with this regardless. I have trouble with this regardless, but it got 300% worse during burnout. I would walk out the door and go, was I trying to eat? Was I trying to drink? Did a kid ask me for something? Did a cat ask me for something? What am I doing here? Why am I here? Like this existential, like, I don't know what's going on. My brain was toast. So here's what I did. Okay. First, I recognized I was in burnout. I said, Danielle, you are in burnout. Your priority is just like trying to make things okay-ish, right? Nothing is going to be 100% in burnout. Nothing is probably even going to be 35% in burnout, frankly. And so the first thing I really had to do was reset my expectations of what was possible for me in this moment. Not to say, hey, you're never going to feel better again. Not to say, oh, I'm a failure because I can't like cook for my kids and we had pizza again. Not to say, oh, I'm a failure because I spent too much money on pizza again. But to say, I am having a significant challenge, and I am not going to let the little brain worms tell me that I'm crappy because I'm having this challenge. I'm going to reset my expectations. I'm going to say Danielle in burnout is not capable of the level of activity as Danielle in a normal state, right? Danielle in burnout is not able to cook as much, to clean as much, to pick up trash, to clean the cat food off the wall, to do any of these things, right? And so the first thing I want to encourage folks who are dealing with this to do is really, 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 really reset your expectations. Really say, if this person who is going through burnout, internal you, right? Internal Danielle, if they were sitting right next to you, what would you tell them? Would you tell them they should feel bad for ordering pizza again? Would you tell them that they should feel bad that there's dust in the corners? Would you tell them that they should feel bad that they're not like that they're sleeping too much and they're hardly leaving bed? It's like, no, you got to be kind to yourself and you got to reset expectations. Danielle's going to leave the bed when she freaking can. And that's that, right? And if she's out of bed, she's doing a good job. Okay. And that is the kind of attitude that I think we need to practice taking with ourselves kind of all the time, but especially in a vulnerable period like burnout. Okay. The second thing outside of resetting expectations is prioritizing the self-care and relinking to your community. When you feel crappy, it is human nature, at least for some of us, to hibernate, right? To say, I want to just be in my bed watching Drawfee, and I do not want to talk to anyone. I do not want to text anyone. I do not want to call anyone. And to some extent, calling people and texting people and going to coffee with people or whatever your social thing is legitimately difficult in burnout. It is legitimately difficult to want to do the executive function pieces, like the tasks you have to do to even text somebody, right? But it's also difficult to like want to be in a place that doesn't feel safe. When we're burned out, we are even more likely to feel less safe than any other time. And as we've talked about multiple times on the podcast, autistic people's, a lot of our internal experience is just 100% not feeling safe anywhere, right? I feel safe in my room, but the rest of the house, I'm like, 95% safe in, right? My kids are loud. My cats yowl, as you have heard in this podcast, because I can't freaking filter Leo out of it no matter what I do. Sometimes people come knock on the door. I think there's really something to the fact that a lot of us have experienced so much trauma that when we're burnt out, it makes sense that we want to hide. We want to keep ourselves safe. But it's also really important to, even if it's just a little bit, find your friends and let them tell you that it's going to be okay. Even if that's 1% of the contact you used to have with that person, it's still better than nothing. And it's important to remind yourself that like you used to be okay and you're going to be okay again, right? The other thing is that self-care piece. The first 2 months after the miscarriage, I think I basically laid in bed and watched Drawfee. I read a little bit. I hung out with my kids. We watched so many cartoons. And I tried to just focus on eating and drinking and being with my family, right? Those for me were the things that were self-care. Those for me were the things that I will feel better if I can basically feed myself, basically rest myself, and try to be reinvigorated and enjoy my life from my kids, who are a huge portion of my life, and my cats, who are a huge portion of my life, right? I backed up from neurodiverging a ton. Thank you so much to Jen and Emily for like making the business run, because I really had to back off. I couldn't handle the executive function of writing emails, and my brain was mush, right? People with mush brains should not write emails. I read lots of fiction. I took so many baths. Here comes Leo again. I ordered food in, as I mentioned. And I also just want to say that as a, like from the professional side, as a coach, this is the piece of burnout recovery that I see clients struggling with the most. I think a lot of us are taught that if we're not productive, then we're failing. And burnout requires you to be literally non-productive if you want to feel better, because all of our energy and all of our attention and intention needs to go internal, right? It needs to go to our basic, like interoceptive, proprioceptive stuff, right? All you can do during burnout is let your brain recover, let your brain reconnect, let your brain do the work it needs to do to feel okay again. And that's all internal work. You can't see it at all from the outside. So from the outside, it looks like you're sitting around watching TV and eating pizza, right? And it's really easy to judge ourselves, but also to judge other people for what looks like lazy behavior. But as we know, laziness is not real, right? Thank you, Devin Price. Laziness is a way of saying there's a mismatch between the expectation and what's actually happening, right? If your expectation, and this is just to circle back around, if your expectation is that you'll be able to function the way you used to, you're going to feel bad because you're not going to be able to meet your expectation. So in burnout, the first steps are to be as freaking lazy as you can, to get as much off your plate as you can, to defer tasks, to delegate tasks, to get everything out of your way so that you can sit and watch TV and let your brain, the subconscious background stuff, sort itself out. After enough time and enough rest, most of our brains sort themselves out, and you might need therapy, you might need psychiatric help, you might need peer support, you might need like community support. There's lots of other, other things you might want to add into this, right? But the basic level is you have to drop your expectations for your productivity and let yourself feel better. And that's hard, right? it took me a decade and watching so many clients go through this to realize that that's what was needed. So I was in chronic burnout for most of my 20s and the early part of my 30s. And by the time I was identified as autistic, I had been in burnout for probably, constant burnout for probably 7 or 8 years. And also, I had postpartum depression, I had PTSD, I had a slew of diagnoses, most of which had accumulated during that burnout period because I wasn't getting what I needed, right? The huge difference between how long it took me to recover from that burnout, right? It took years, years and years and years and years to feel better and to remember that I could be a person who enjoyed their lives again, right? And now I had a miscarriage in August. It's February, right? So it's 6 months later. I'm still going through the grief process, but I'm here with you. I'm feeling better. I'm eating and drinking. I'm hanging out with my cats. I cleaned the whole house. I connected with my friends. I'm not in burnout anymore. I don't feel 110%. I had a substantial loss 6 months ago, but I'm certainly not in the state that I was 2, 3, 4 months ago. I am recovering from burnout. I would say I am recovered, right? In the sense that I am at 85 to 90%, which I think is pretty good because the idea that you're supposed to be at 100% all the time is pretty bonkers if you think about it. You're going to be at 100% like twice in your life. And the rest of the time, if you're at like 60, 70%, I think you're doing pretty well. The hardest part about recovering from burnout is that you just have to let yourself do it. There's no rushing it. There's no making it faster. There's no, if you follow this exact plan and do it in this exact way, you will recover in 3 months. You have been damaged. You have been put through things humans are not designed to go through. And your brain and your body are freaking resilient and you can feel better. But it's not going to happen next week or the week after or the week after. You have to commit to being kind to yourself. And this society doesn't help us do that very easily. You have to commit to letting yourself lay around and follow the things you feel like doing. You have to be willing to lean in to where you feel uncomfortable and think about why and what you could do to feel better, as opposed to avoiding that discomfort. And all that stuff is basically impossible if you've been in chronic burnout for a long time, if you've experienced past trauma. It is super normal for me to see clients take 2 years to recover from burnout. Not to say that it takes 2 years for them to feel better, right? But that it takes 2 years for them to get from I have nothing in the tank to my tank is 80% full. You can make significant strides faster, but there's no speed run to getting through burnout. It's taking care of yourself. And we're not taught to do that. And we're taught to feel bad when we do that. Next week, I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about more practically the actual things that I have been doing after that initial self-care period of immediate response to burnout. I'm going to talk about what I would consider sort of the second stage of burnout recovery, which is that practical, strategic resetting of your life and your expectations and your goals that we do as our energy improves, but we don't want to go into burnout again. So using this past experience, I'm going to talk about that more. And I hope it will be helpful to some of you who are going through it now. I want you to know, if you are in burnout, that you are not doing anything wrong. You have not done anything wrong. It is not your fault. It is really hard to be a person with feelings in a society that doesn't have them. My best advice for you is to look at your expectations for yourself and consider, really, are they reasonable? Would you tell a friend, your best friend, the person you love most in all the world, would you hold them to those expectations? Most people, when they really start to look at it, realize that their expectations for themselves are sky high. And a lot of that is because we have been working so hard to mask. We've been working so hard to look neurotypical that we put unreasonable expectations to ourselves. And that not only causes burnout in the first place, but also makes it harder to recover, right? So go work with your therapist, go work with your best friend, go work with your coach, whoever it is, or sit and journal if you're one of those, and figure out, are your expectations reasonable? How could you make yourself feel better right now? Is that watching some TV, putting some candy in your desk drawer, going for a walk, opening the window, petting your cat? Do something for yourself. Take care of yourself the way you would if you had a baby sitting next to you, or your old man black cat who likes to yell during podcasts. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this is helpful. If you're going through burnout, please know you are not alone. You are not alone, and you can get through it. Come back next week where we'll be talking about the second stage of recovery. And please take care of yourselves. Please remember, we are all in this together.